larger group that was interested in participating. So we did that, recorded the meetings, had the agenda, all that stuff is shared in the Google Doc linked here. It was well received. We're looking to pick a different topic probably to start in the next, in 2019. So there's a link to the issue there if you're interested in participating or following along. We'll obviously still keep it open and documented and everything for folks to follow along as they're interested. The Lead Developer Conference in Austin was last week. This is the same group that also does a conference in New York and London on a regular basis. The notes from the talk as well as the list are up there. They'll have recordings for the talks available soon. Some of the highlights from my perspective, first, it was really interesting to see the topics for the talks. The opening talk was essentially crucial conversations again from a different perspective. It didn't explicitly reference the book or the material, but it was that same kind of how do you resolve conflict in a team kind of conversation. The closing talk, this is me being a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It felt a little bit like an extended ad for how to win friends and influence people, but it was essentially a discussion about how politics isn't always necessarily a bad thing, and sometimes getting to know people and sharing your thoughts and opinions is an important aspect of being a healthy part of a team. So relationship, communication issues still seem to be a pretty dominant trend in the engineering management industry right now. The new VP of Engineering from Buffer gave a talk that was about building and scaling distributed teams, which was really interesting because it basically described GitLab, a lot of the things that GitLab already does, over communication, documentation, transparency, even down to using DonutBot and Slack were all things that were listed that were important for driving a healthy distributed team. So that was interesting to see. There was a great talk on inclusion. It's a prerequisite for a healthy and diverse organization. You know, there are a lot of statistics that are kind of thrown around about how more diverse teams yield better results. But in order to have a really diverse team in the first place, you have to have a strong environment of inclusion built around that in the first place. And I got booed at a conference, which is the first time I can say that that happened. It was all in good fun. There was one of the speakers, obviously there's a conference in Texas, and in the southern US, people have very strong opinions about how they prefer to have their barbecue. And in Texas, they have a very strong predilection towards beef barbecue, but in my part of the country, it's more towards pork. So when one of the speakers stood up and said he had to share his preferences about pork-based barbecue, I applauded and then pretty much immediately got booed. So that's a new highlight for me. That's something I could check off my bucket list. Moving from that, want to briefly discuss hiring. We have a graph here. Some of you may have seen the spreadsheet going around. There's a link in the doc if you want to drill in and see some of the data. What this spreadsheet indicates, the blue line is kind of the headcount plan, and this is based off of our quarterly hiring KRs. And then the red line indicates our actual headcount. And this is for folks on both the dev backend and ops backend sides of the team. Or the organization. You can see that we're kind of moving fairly flat until November, where all of a sudden we shoot up. And in fact, if you look at it, we had 11 offers accepted in November compared to 16 offers accepted in the 10 months prior to that. So the little dotted line here along the bottom represents what we would have done if we had stayed on the same pace we had throughout the start of the year. So obviously in November, we saw a big jump. And if we project that out, we're getting a lot closer to our target for the end of the year. And hopefully, of course, we would love to see this come up this way, but it's something that we're still working through as we go through December. So major improvement there. The reasons for that, there are a few that I want to call out, and there are probably a bunch of little things that lead into this as well, but the big three. One was the benchmark change as we move from developer to backend engineer. That obviously has had a big impact. The recruiting team has ramped up. They've continued to help make the process efficient. I don't know with the way that our hiring processes were, with the way that, with the number of people that we had staffed on recruiting and everything at the start of the year, if we would have even been able to get this many people through the process as quickly as we did in the month of November, much less have the major impact on candidate experience and everything that recruiting has. So I want to give a shout out to Steve and Trust and everybody else involved in that process. Shoshana, I'm sure there's a list of people that have been involved in helping us get better people in the pipeline and get them through quickly, which has been fantastic. And we also interestingly noticed that there was some delayed impact from some of the earlier activities we had done on hiring. So we had some folks that we had engineering managers go out and try to source back in June or July of this year, who for various reasons kind of only got around to applying and getting through the process in the month of November. So it was interesting to see some of those dividends pay off for us as well. Looking forward, however, while this is great and it definitely gets us more where we need to be, obviously 1 month is not a sample size that you want to try to extrapolate from, but if you can get 11 new people every month, that's 121 people that we would have hired if we had been doing that every month so far through January. So we need to not only, though, catch back up to the 2018 hiring plan where we still have that gap to close, but we're also planning for 2019 where we're looking at growing again by a significant amount. I know that number isn't finalized yet, but those goals are being developed. They're going to continue to be aggressive, obviously, as we want to scale. So what are some things that we're going to do to not only help us maintain this pace, but potentially exceed it as we go into 2019? We have a couple of links to issues here for some iterations that we want to continue to do on the compensation calculator. Particularly the people ops issue linked here, I think is really important, where we start talking more about the total compensation and trying to be more public and more visible with everyone around a lot of the benefits, particularly I think stock options, and talking about that in a way that is clear about the value that we're potentially providing there. Is going to be an important aspect of continuing to sell people on GitLab's total compensation package, rather than right now where we have a calculator that's just focused on base. But also some other usability issues, and really just trying to make it as visible and as palatable as possible to folks that are coming in. And that's one of the first things they might be looking at as they go through the application process. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to continue experimenting with different job boards to help improve the size, the quality, the diversity of the pool even further. That's one of the great things, and I think I mentioned this last time about Greenhouse, where we can actually track this in a really meaningful way. And we've already been working with recruiting to put more advertisements out and starting to get some results and see, okay, which candidates are coming from what sources, how viable are those sources? Are they producing really high quality for us in terms of the hires or the kinds of hires that they're bringing in, or are they potentially not a great investment for us because they're not bringing in a lot of people that we're interested in moving forward through the process with. So hopefully with those two things and the success that we've seen over the past month, we're going to be really well positioned to stay on top of our hiring goals in 2019. But with that, and I have seen some activity in chat, so I'll go ahead and pull that up, but I also want to go ahead and open the floor for questions. Looks like the slides were wrong on the calendar invite. Thanks, Baloo, for helping everyone out with that. Lucas, I believe it's okay to ask questions. That's fine by me anyway, please do. It's not much of a conversation if nobody asks.
So then let me just jump right in here. So
sure.
One question is, if we have so many great people to hire, are we thinking about a certain amount of junior developers as well, or do we want to have like the proper developers that don't need too much maintenance on our side? Because I think with remote companies, it's a big problem how to mentor people, how to train people, right?
It is. It is a problem. I want to say there's very much still an open conversation. Sure. Thanks, y'all. I'll stop sharing. I think there's very much still an open conversation going on about junior developers and the role that they would play in terms of growing the team at GitLab. You have to balance a couple of different concerns. On the one hand, there can be a lot of great advantages to building a certain percentage of juniors into a team, aside from the fact that that can typically be a good way to improve diversity on the team. It can be a good way to give senior members of the team a great opportunity for mentoring and coaching, which are skills that they're going to need to develop, and giving them a really explicit way to do that. There can be some teams in particular where you've got work that's going to be better suited for junior developers than others. And so there can be a great way to do some skill fit there, where you can say, okay, this would actually be really challenging work and appropriate work for a junior developer. Let's get them on board and help them through that. On the other hand, and this is, I think, some of what you were speaking to, there's always a cost associated with that, right? The reason they're junior developers is, in a sense, they're taking some productivity away from the team because those senior members of the team have to step in and get involved in training them and spend time coaching them through issues and everything else, which can be harder to do sometimes. It depends a lot on the personalities and everything, but it can be harder to do in a remote environment for some folks. So
do we also take in consideration that, you know, not hiring junior developers might drive senior developers away that want to mentor and stuff like that? I mean, that's also a fact, right? It's not just like they need more maintenance, but they also, as you said, they provide great things when it comes to diversity, and they might also bring, you know, if they're just freshly trained as developers, they might bring in some other experiences as well. It also helps, you know, with the more code we have, we have a lot of tasks that are repetitive and that might annoy senior developers to do, but they are a great learning experience for junior developers.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I have to admit, it's not one that I've encountered before. I've never interviewed a potential senior developer, senior engineer candidate who's asked questions about, okay, but how many juniors do you have? What kind of opportunities am I going to have to mentor people, right? So those aren't questions that I'm hearing or have heard. That doesn't mean it's not a valid stake to put in the ground for the conversation, right? So yeah, at any rate, right now, we don't have any plans to open up. You know, we still have the same stance that we've had for at least the majority of this year, which is that we're not explicitly looking to hire junior developers. But that's, you know, it's a conversation that comes up periodically. And in the event that it changes, we'll make sure that there's obviously a merge request to the handbook and share that with everyone. Yeah, and if you want to bring it up in engineering office hours, that's a thing you can do as well. Okay, I'm gonna keep going through chat here. Roger, remote work itself is a huge plus, right? And that's one of the things that we're talking about. If you look through those issues for improving the compensation calculator, particularly, again, that people ops issue, talking about things like, let's translate some of these values into some fiscal value for you. So talking about things like how much money you might save on your commute, for example, what kind of value you may get from living in the community that you want to live in rather than the community that you have to live in because that's where your offices are located. These are all pretty nascent ideas. We don't know exactly how we would express these in terms of the comp calculator, but that's the kind of value that we want to get across. It's great. Dylan asked about investing time in improving the jobs page. I think I see Sid opened an issue for that later on in the chat, which is great. Jason, a section on our hiring page with stories from GitLabbers explaining how remote work changed my life. Yeah, testimonials are always great. Add it to the issue. Let's make it happen. Then for the discussion. Yeah, Gabrielle calls out that car examples, like how much money you might save on gas, doesn't always apply in every location. And that's for sure. And that's something we'd have to address either in terms of making it clear that this is estimated or trying to figure out a different way to present that because there are going to be a lot of people that use bikes or public transportation or, you know, any other alternatives for making their commute work. And time.
So yeah, commute and time. So one question I have regarding the salary calculator, and maybe you're the wrong person to ask. So I have couldn't sleep last night, and I thought about salary tax, and it seems like in Germany, salary tax has like a progression model. So it's not really a linear model, and I don't know if this is baked into our compensation calculator implicitly by the numbers we use from Numbeo. But I wonder whether, if you have like a point in the compensation calculator, like 0.4, and you have like the location index and 0.5, and if that difference, if that scale of linear scaling also reflects like that the rent is also scaling linearly, or if I have 10K more or whatever amount of money more a year, does it scale linearly compared to the rent, or does it not? That's a question I have regarding the compensation calculator.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm absolutely not the right person to answer it. I think Brittany was probably more involved of anyone that's still with GitLab in terms of how the calculator was structured, and has continued to be involved in that. So she'd probably be a good person to direct that question to. And David says he was thinking about that same thing. So that may be a good thing to do in an issue so that folks can follow along. All right. Well, I'm not hearing anything else. So I will wish everyone a happy rest of your Monday, hopefully a warmer Monday that I'm having here in South Carolina. And we'll see everyone on the team call.